Maybe you know what's about to happen. We're in Oakland, California. It's June 19th, 2016. Game 7 of the NBA Finals between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Check the score and the time remaining. Barring disaster, the Cavaliers are about to win the first NBA championship in the 46-year history of the franchise. Cleveland fans have waited half a century for this moment. Before we witness it, we must give that drought a close examination. The Cavaliers enjoyed a miracle playoff run in their first decade of existence, only for new ownership to strip them bare, embarrass them at every turn, and nearly rip them from Cleveland entirely. In the 80s, this franchise got a lifeline and built the foundation of a contender almost in one night. But they were thwarted by the NBA's mightiest foes. Injuries, bad trades, and yeah, that guy. Cleveland followed another miserable era with what felt like a gift from God. Perhaps the greatest prospect ever, born and raised in Ohio, delivered by lottery to his hometown team, only for new ownership and weak management to fail their centerpiece, then drive him away. The Cleveland Cavaliers have died several times, victim of their own bad choices. Yet here they stand, alive, about to win a championship. To understand how much this means, we need to rewind. Like, really, really rewind. Perhaps you recognize this guy. This is Kyrie Irving. If we rewind about a minute of game time, we'll see Kyrie sizing up the defense on one of the most important possessions in Cavaliers history. With a tied score and 1 minute remaining, this game was in his hands. Rewind a little further, and you'll recall the way Irving became a Cavalier. 5 years ago, the very bad 2011 Cavaliers made a pivotal trade. By surrendering a decent veteran, Mo Williams, to the Los Angeles Clippers, the Cavs received Baron Davis, but also an intriguing dice roll. The mediocre Clippers sent Cleveland their 2011 lottery pick, ultimately a 2.8% chance to receive the top selection in that summer's amateur draft. Those long-shot odds paid off. The NBA draft allows bad, barren teams to conscript the best incoming talent, to choose elite young players who'd be unlikely to choose them. The pool of 2011 prospects was headlined by, you guessed it, Kyrie Irving. And after winning the lottery with someone else's ticket, the Cavs were clear to draft him, to all but force a future star onto their roster. In Cleveland, Irving developed into a brilliant point guard, an artist with his dribble, able to find the net from anywhere. That trade and its ideal payoff presented a welcome change for longtime Cavaliers fans. It meant a lot to see a bad team seize the best opportunity for improvement. The move that begot Kyrie Irving stands out in Cavaliers history. It epitomizes the unique value of draft picks, of choosing. To really measure that value, we must go back to the beginning. Cleveland, Ohio entered 1970 with big stuff happening. Carl Stokes was its first black mayor. The city had begun a major cleanup after the Cuyahoga River caught fire again the previous summer. In pro sports, the NFL's Cleveland Browns were contenders, even after the retirement of Jim Brown, who had led them to their recent title in 1964. And a businessman named Nick Maletti was scrounging up cash to start a pro basketball franchise. It wouldn't be the city's first. For instance, Cleveland celebrated an ABL champion back in the 1920s. I feel like I missed out on the era when you could name a whole basketball team after one specific Jewish guy. Cleveland exited the Great Depression with its own arena. But mid-century, it was nearby Akron, Ohio that hosted the best amateur players and the most interesting industrial teams, with stars like Lil Baby Larry Brown, who played a couple years for the Goodyear Wingfoots, sponsored by the tire company. Hoops glory returned to Cleveland in 1962, when George Steinbrenner experienced his first taste of successful sports ownership. The Cleveland Pipers, champions of another short-lived league called the ABL. Still, while Cleveland Arena occasionally hosted the Cincinnati Royals, it lacked a full-time NBA occupant. This was a pre-merger era when the league still competed with the ABA to plant flags in major markets. Enticing buy-in fees of just a few $1 million stoked expansion, inviting franchises that exist to this day. The hopeful NBA franchisee in Cleveland, Mileti, already owned the local arena and its resident AHL hockey team. He gathered a couple $1 million from a few major investors, then raised the rest by selling individual shares to regular people, and boom, Cleveland had an NBA team. The nickname Cavaliers won out over some other contenders. I like some of these, but anyway, time for basketball. Time to start working toward an NBA championship. Expansion teams build from expansion drafts. Cleveland got to pick over other teams' rosters for players left unprotected. This was one of the first routes by which people became Cavaliers. Players like John Warren, Walt Wesley, and Bingo Smith joined rookie John Johnson on the first ever roster. Those Cavs started off terrible, as expansion clubs often do. They lost their first 15 games, giving us the famous anecdote of Coach Bill Fitch trying to enter an arena without his credential, getting questioned, and asking security why on earth anyone would lie about being head coach of a team that had literally never won a game. He got in. But Fitch's Cavs improved, in part because losing teams receive high picks in the college draft. In 1971, Cleveland used the first overall pick on Austin Carr, a guard coming off a stupendous collegiate career at Notre Dame. This old News 5 footage gives a sense of how drafting looked back then.
Cleveland draft, Austin Carr.
Austin Carr.
And this look of elation on Coach Fitch's face tells you how much one high draft pick can change the mood for a franchise. Injuries kept Carr from reaching his full Hall of Fame potential, but he nonetheless became the face of the team. Aging star Lenny Wilkens joined him in the backcourt for a couple years. Day 1 Cavalier Bingo Smith and 1974 draft pick Campy Russell held down the front court. In the mid-70s, the Cavaliers moved out of their old downtown arena to Mileti's brand new Richfield Coliseum in the suburbs. And from Richfield, the Cavs tried something new: victory. Fitch won Coach of the Year, conducting a lively 49-win season in 75-76. Those Cavs depended on Jim Chones down low and got a boost of veteran know-how from a midseason acquisition, old Akron-born star Nate Thurmond. But Cleveland could get scoring from basically anywhere in their deep, super balanced rotation. That first winning season begot a first-ever playoff series. Cleveland's gripping back and forth with the Washington Bullets came down to the wire. Over 20,000 fans packed the Coliseum to watch Dick Snyder's terrific Game 7, which climaxed with this weird banked-in floater to go up 2 in the final seconds. On the last-ditch Bullets possession, Cleveland tipped the inbound, then got the stop. The whole building erupted, fans flooding the court in celebration of the so-called miracle at Richfield. Here's iconic Cavs announcer Joe Tate delivering the call with signature enthusiasm.
Cavaliers win 87-85. The Cavaliers have defeated the Washington Bullets 87-85. And the crowd is going berserk at the Coliseum.
People still wonder if those miracle Cavs might have run all the way to the 1976 title. What if Jim Chones had been healthy for the conference finals against the Celtics? Without Chones and his fractured foot, Cleveland went down in 6. The Bill Fitch Cavs never matched the miracle, but they kept winning, drawing fans to Richfield Coliseum, and making the playoffs. Yes, that's Walt Frazier. Momentum fizzled in 1979, when Cleveland's injured roster slipped to a 30-52 record. Fitch resigned soon thereafter to go coach the Celtics, where things turned out pretty well. The Cavs improved somewhat the next season, even though their long-shot campaign to bring 43-year-old Wilt Chamberlain out of retirement failed. Cleveland got new leadership and coach Stan Albeck, plus a breakout scoring season from recent draft pick Mike Mitchell. They fell a few wins short of the playoffs. But the real Cavs stories were happening off the court. Nick Maletti decided it was time to cash out. Majority ownership of the Cavaliers changed hands repeatedly in early 1980, like once every couple weeks. We're about to talk quite a bit about the man who owned the team when the dust settled. But we should first acknowledge something often unsaid or misstated in Cavs history. A short-sighted move made while the dust of Maletti's initial sale was still flying. Again, worse teams receive higher draft picks, especially in this era before the lottery. But in February 1980, the mediocre Cavaliers dealt injured guard Butch Lee and their 1982 first-round pick to the very good Los Angeles Lakers in exchange for bench warmer Don Ford and LA's 1980 first-rounder. Cleveland traded future for present in the middle of a sale. And that, friends, is how the 1982 NBA champion Lakers, already employers of Magic and Kareem, got to select James Worthy first in that summer's draft, because the Cavs had bet on themselves 2 years prior and lost that bet. So let us be clear that Cleveland hampered its own future before this man took control. Not his fault. It's worth noting because everything I'm about to tell you, it's going to be his fault. This is Theodore J. Stepien. Stepien had been an amateur athlete growing up in Pittsburgh, then served in World War II. After the war, Stepien moved to Cleveland and founded Nationwide Advertising Service, a sprawling operation that placed classified ads in newspapers around the world. The business grew big, Stepien became wealthy, and he invested his newfound capital in Cleveland sports teams, baseball and softball to start. While business boomed, Stepien experienced personal tragedy. Anne, Ted's wife of 26 years and the mother of his 6 daughters, died in December 1979. I mention this because years later, Stepien's daughter said her father wouldn't have invested time and money in the NBA if not for Anne's passing. Stepien's purchase processed in spring 1980, and not without controversy. During a messy changeover, the league's board of governors questioned Stepien over strange and racist comments he'd made in recent years. He had said Cleveland's baseball team was owned by a Jewish clique, and criticized its hiring of a black manager, Frank Robinson. Most relevant was something Stepien had once said about the Cavaliers. If he owned the team, he'd make half the squad white because white people need white heroes. The Cavs, he suggested, had too many black players. Pressed on those remarks, Stepien brushed them aside as marketing and insisted he wasn't prejudiced. Evidently, that was enough for the board because Stepien got approved to buy a majority share of the Cavaliers. The league was pretty desperate to keep its foothold in Cleveland. Stepien pledged to be an involved owner, and he certainly was, not just with basketball operations. Ted was always around the team, delighted with the attention and the hobnobbing. He blustered in earshot of reporters, betraying insecurity, pettiness, and just old-fashioned sleaze. Stepien adorned the Cavs' product to fit his own unique tastes, pushing them to be more than a basketball team. He spearheaded gimmicks like a Cavs-themed polka song and a dance team much deeper than the basketball roster. Stepien scouted the gastronomic talents of local legend Boot Buttry, seen here gallantly pursuing the world record for spaghetti eating. Stepien hired him to perform stunts like biting the tops off beer cans. You can see why Boot deserved the gig. This was cheesy, relatively harmless entertainment. I emphasize relatively harmless to contrast with the way Stepien promoted his softball franchise in the summer of 1980. Recreating a stunt the baseball team had attempted, Stepien stood atop Terminal Tower in downtown Cleveland and dropped softballs 50-something stories to the street below, where players from the Cleveland competitors waited to catch them. Except he didn't drop them, he threw them outward. And yeah, look at that. A projectile chucked with force from over 50 stories will travel a parabola well beyond the building's footprint. One wayward softball shattered the wrist of this poor bystander. Another injured someone's shoulder. One dented a car. Dude couldn't see the ground hundreds of feet below, which was by this point filled with panicked, scattering pedestrians. Eventually, Stepien opted for a gentler drop and got the catch he was looking for. The players looked happy to end the ordeal. This post-stunt interview with Stepien is a pretty good glimpse into the man's psyche. He's so matter-of-fact.
No one really told me what the exact situation was because I was very unfortunate.
So casually boastful.
I played a lot of softball, and I felt I could do what they wanted me to do is get the ball down to a player to catch the ball.
So quick to pass off blame after pelting people with softballs from the sky.
They told me that I should throw the ball 90 feet, which was correct, so when I threw the first ball, it was too far.
Oh, and always promoting, however awkwardly.
Jeff, I want to introduce one of our Cavalier ticket sellers, Janice Marin, so we had to put that in for you.
Okay.
So that's the extracurricular decision making. Now let's talk about the basketball decisions. Wantonly heaving softballs off a skyscraper is actually a pretty good metaphor there. Stepien's foremost flaw as a leader was misplaced trust, a disastrous pattern of delegation. He was the kind of guy who'd send a random ad salesman on a basketball scouting trip. This trait stood out from day one. Stepien's first major front office hire was Bill Musselman. Musselman had been away from the game for a bit. He got the gig thanks to a coordinated campaign, with friends like baseball manager Billy Martin singing his praises. That did the trick, but not everyone was as dazzled as Stepien. Ohioans knew Musselman as the super intense former coach of the hated University of Minnesota. Specifically, he was the guy whose 1972 team instigated a huge brawl with this deliberate-looking knee. The fight sent a defenseless Ohio State player to the hospital. So, not the most popular guy locally. People remembered the fight and blamed Bill Musselman. But now it was Musselman's job to help build a decent roster for Cavs head coach Stan Oh, interesting. Sensing doom, Coach Stan Albeck broke contract and fled for a job with the Spurs. To Musselman's delight, Stepien was like, okay, I guess you're coach now. For a general manager, Stepien settled on Don Delaney. Delaney's most recent relevant experience was as the coach of Stepien's softball team. Tight. Over just a few months, this brain trust would perform an astounding demolition. Thanks to trades, the 80-81 Cavs bore little resemblance to the team Stepien inherited. Before the season began, out went Foots Walker. Cleveland ditched their starting point guard and best passer, notably in exchange for a white player, Roger Fegley. Foots was delighted to be free from Stepien. The day after that trade, out went Campy Russell, one of Cleveland's top scorers. Russell had gone on the record about Stepien's racism. He'd also drawn Musselman's ire already for no discernible reason. Russell, too, was glad to be gone. He could tell Cleveland was headed the wrong way. The guys Cleveland got back in trades, guys who had no say in becoming Cavaliers, didn't have the juice to turn things around. The regular season only brought more trades. Out went big man Dave Robish. Robish had just signed a contract extension during the Stepien takeover, but didn't exactly hit it off with Musselman. Cleveland traded Robish for a package centered around Kim Hughes, one of the worst shooters in the NBA, a guy whose main contribution to the Cavs was painting his dick green on St. Patrick's Day. While their teammates vanished, the poor souls stuck in Cleveland, both new and old, grew mutinous. Musselman drew their ire with stuff like wildly allocating playing time, and he made players wait around for practice to start while he finished racquetball games. But for this fan base, short-term strife and roster damage weren't the worst of it. Remember, bad teams should not trade draft picks. They need those picks to add talent. Well, despite losing, despite already missing some future selections, Steppian's crew continued the trend of dumping picks. One team in particular reaped the benefits of Cleveland's complacency. The NBA expanded to include the Dallas Mavericks in the early 1980s. The Mavs actually snagged Austin Carr when Cleveland left him unprotected during the 1980 ownership change. Kind of an unceremonious farewell for the team's first star. Carr joined the typical motley roster of an expansion team, but it didn't stay that way for long. In September 1980, the Cavs traded their 1984 first-rounder to the Mavericks. A month later, they sent this package to the Mavs. Bill Robinzine, whom they just acquired for Campy Russell, plus 2 future first-round picks in 83 and 86. Dallas coach Dick Motto once said he was afraid to take lunch for fear he'd miss a call from the Cavs, and he got them on the horn one more time that season. In February, the Mavs completed their set, acquiring Cleveland's 1985 first-rounder. Dallas went on to make the Western Conference Finals in 1988, just their 8th season of existence. These, in order of win shares, were the top 8 players on that 53-win team. Here are the ones they acquired using Cleveland's draft picks earlier in the decade. Dallas set up most of an elite rotation in like 3 phone calls with Ted Steppian and friends. Just to game this out because it's absurd, note that the Mavericks didn't even draft that well with Cleveland's picks. They could have had Clyde Drexler in 83. Sam Perkins was good, but not even close to the best player in the legendary 84 draft. Charles Barkley was the very next pick. Karl Malone was still on the board when the Mavs picked Detlef Schrempf in 85. We'll come back to that draft later. My point is, the Cleveland Cavaliers could have added any of these exciting 80s rookies if Steppian hadn't already surrendered their rights to Dallas. And the guys Cleveland got in return, aside from maybe Jeff Houston, didn't amount to much with the Cavaliers. Some of them didn't even have a chance. The most baffling example was that of Jerome Whitehead, acquired in the October 1980 deal that cost Cleveland 2 future first-rounders. The Cavs released Whitehead 18 days after that trade, straight up cut him for nothing, after sacrificing a huge part of their future for the guy. These transactions alarmed the NBA so much that the league stepped in and required all Cavalier trades get approval from above. They do not normally do that. Meanwhile, the team lost. They lost games, they lost fans. Just 5 years after their miracle playoff run, the Cavs were plummeting, far removed from title aspirations. Critics piled on with good reason. Feeling victimized, Steppian lashed out. Tired of the brutal honesty, Steppian drove beloved announcer Joe Tate away from the team and actually sued local radio station 3WE. He even physically attacked reporters. To be fair, I can see why his feelings were hurt. And Steppian counted plenty of enemies outside the media. Almost from the start, he threatened the whole city by insinuating he might move the team. As losses mounted, Steppian passed off blame. He fired the PR guy. He removed Bill Musselman as coach, reassigned him to the front office, and replaced him with Don Delaney, the softball guy, someone who'd only ever coached basketball at the junior college level. Cleveland did have some bright spots on the court in '81. All-star Mike Mitchell, decent wings of different ages in Fegley and Randy Smith, improving power forward Kenny Carr. A rookie by the name of Bill Laimbeer broke out as a strong rebounder after other big guys departed. Within the next year, Steppian and Musselman would get rid of every person I just named. All of them. But 1981 brought changes to NBA labor relations. The Players Association had fought for and won a bit more control over where they worked. In the aftermath of a landmark court settlement, certain players could sign offer sheets with teams other than their own. If your old team wouldn't match the contract offer you got, they would have to let you walk. Today, we'd call this restricted free agency. Now that some players could exercise some modicum of choice, Stepien wanted them to choose the Cavs. He was all over the offer sheets, cost be damned. After all, this was a guy who idolized George Steinbrenner, by this point famous for spending big to build the mighty New York Yankees. Stepien offered free agent Otis Birdsong $1 million a year plus bonuses, the type of contract reserved at the time for the best of the best. Birdsong had already rejected Cleveland several times, but Stepien just kept pushing his number higher until it was undeniable. Cleveland's Birdsong offer actually got matched, but it jolted the whole market. Other owners were compelled to pony up unprecedented money to retain stars. They grumbled about whether the guy who'd set the bar so high could actually afford these pricey offers. The Cavs' biggest of several successful free agency signings was James Edwards, a pretty good forward who described Cleveland with the zeal of someone paid like a superstar to move there. With new blood and mounting payroll, the 81-82 Cavs sucked. The so-called Cleveland Cadavers went 15-67, matching the failure of their first ever season as a franchise. It's really something when a player you scouted and acquired says you don't know basketball. But Stepien wasn't going to take the blame. He spent the season blazing through coaches. Stepien fired his pal Delaney after 15 games, but kept him on as GM. Loyal guy. After 3 games of interim Bob Kloppenberg and a no thank you from Hubie Brown, Stepien brought in a new hire, Philadelphia assistant Chuck Daly. Daly arrived eager to make something work, but in the near term, the Cavs kept losing. Players insisted it wasn't Daly's fault. The roster just didn't make sense, but Stepien wasn't hearing it. He fired Coach Daly before the newcomer could even move into a home, aborting a career stint Daly would later dub My 93 Days at the Richfield Holiday Inn. Stepien replaced Daly with Bill fucking Musselman, charming and popular as ever. Musselman bemoaned a roster he'd helped build, and later got accused by coworkers of threatening to fire them, harassing them with creepy phone calls, and spying. On the night Cleveland tied their worst ever record, Ted Stepien threw a reporter out of the Coliseum, then held a champagne party in the locker room. Players felt humiliated. Stepien said the losing was their fault anyway. The players were all doing drugs. They were like, nah man, you just did a very bad job building this team. Cleveland entered the 1982 offseason owning a rare draft pick they'd acquired by trading Lambeer. And they burned that pick on John Bagley, a player ranked so much lower by other teams that they thought the selection was a prank. You know, a draft goof. A new Cleveland GM said his employer had made historically bad deals. A new coach said it'd be tough for the Cavs to improve with no draft picks until 2003. Funny choice of year there. Fans, meanwhile, had reason to believe the Cleveland Cavaliers wouldn't even exist in 2003. Stepien's earlier threats of relocating festered. He flirted publicly with the idea of moving the Cavs or selling them to someone non-local. Entering 1983, Stepien had numerous potential new owners lined up, including Don King. Yes, that Don King. Clevelanders prayed for a local buyer, the obvious pick being the Gunn family, owners of the Richfield Coliseum. But selling out of Cleveland seemed likeliest. Stepien spoke on a Canadian radio show about a buyer in Toronto. Pete Franklin, a talk radio guy Stepien once sued, phoned into that show to call Stepien a dumbbell. While the Toronto possibility loomed, other deals fell apart amid Stepien's hasty attempts to undo folly and recoup money. Stepien offloaded his signature free agent signing for cash just so he can make payroll. Years later, James Edwards became a member of the Detroit Pistons, where he won 2 NBA championships with a couple former Cavs. Future Hall of Fame coach Chuck Daly and all-star forward Bill Laimbeer. Detroit actually got Dennis Rodman with a Cavaliers pick too. Anyway, back in March of '83, the Cavs roster once again slumped to a 59-loss season despite the best efforts of new star World B. Free. And the Cavs franchise was all but gone over the border. The deal was publicly regarded as done. Stepien had new branding and everything. From the ashes of the Cavaliers, the Toronto Towers were nearly born. Fans were irate. They wanted the owner gone, not Cleveland's only NBA franchise ever. Yeah, attendance was down, but that's because people refused to pay professional prices for Stepien's amateur product. From Boston, former Miracle Cavs coach Bill Fitch pleaded for an alternative. Cleveland had damn good fans who deserve better. But Stepien wasn't budging from the Toronto move. Nothing was going to change his mind. The Cleveland Cavaliers were dead, victim of homicide by Ted Stepien. And yet, here we are in 2016. The Cleveland Cavaliers exist. Moments ago, Kyrie Irving stared down a chance to play hero in the last minute of a Finals Game 7. He isolated, calmly rocked the ball back and forth into his right hand, pulled up, and
one-on-one, Irving puts it up. It's good! Kyrie Irving from downtown! And the Cavaliers by 3!
One of the most critical, cold-blooded baskets in NBA history belonged to the Cleveland Cavaliers, because this team, unlike Ted Stepien's, traded for a top draft pick. They valued the opportunity to choose. But the Warriors immediately came the other way with a chance to pull even. This screen set up a threatening mismatch. Scary moment for Cavs fans, and we'll see how it went. But first, let's talk about how these men got here. Stories that connect to the second era of Cavaliers history, starting with Kevin Love. Go back a bit and you'll see that the Cavs acquired Love in a 2014 trade. It was a welcome change for the big guy. Love was an outstanding power forward in college at UCLA, even if he hadn't quite figured out his facial hair. His reward for collegiate excellence was getting picked 5th in the 2008 draft, consigned to begin his pro career with the lowly Minnesota Timberwolves. For his first 6 seasons, Love played elite ball, often at an all-star or all-NBA level, alone. The Wolves didn't surround him with talent and never made the postseason. They wasted the charity of high draft position, the opportunity to choose players. Love grew frustrated after 6 seasons stuck losing in Minnesota, but feared penalty if he demanded a trade. Thankfully for Kevin, the Cavaliers desired a ready-made star and dealt the Wolves some promising young players so they could have him. In a way, this trade resembled those of the old bad Cavs from the 80s. Cleveland punted on tomorrow's potential to summon veteran talent today. But in this case, the modern-day Cavaliers traded with sound purpose at the right moment. In Love, Cleveland acquired a leading rebounder, a knockdown shooter, the kind of potent third option a great team needs. And, a couple years later, here was Love defending a pivotal possession with a title on the line. Good trade. That's an important development in Cavaliers history. Trades allow a franchise to transfer players and assets from another team, but only by offering the same in return. That means sacrifice, and it means disruption, so you gotta deal at the right time for the right reasons. We know how ill-considered trades soured the first chapter of Cavaliers history. Let's remember how the Cavs survived Ted Stepien, then met whole new forms of devastation. It's gonna get black and white for a sec. Don't be alarmed. During World War I, the United States passed the Trading with the Enemy Act, which authorized the seizure of German assets in the US. This is how Bayer lost its American patent for aspirin. After Prohibition, an American brewer named George Gunn Jr. capitalized heavily on the purchase and sale of this so-called alien property, like the decaf coffee brand now known as Senka. Decades later, two of Gunn's sons, George III and Gordon, invested that wealth in pro sports, hockey in particular. By the early 1980s, the Gunns owned Richfield Coliseum, which served as the suburban Ohio home of the Cleveland Cavaliers, although not for long. The brothers Gunn had tried to stop Ted Steppian's move to Toronto. Ted insisted he heard their offer in good faith, they just couldn't work things out. But in a surprise turn late in the '83 season, Steppian relented. Gordon and George Gunn put up $20 million or so to not only keep the Cavs at their arena, but also take over Steppian's advertising business. The Cleveland Cavaliers were saved. Ted Steppian was gone. But as we've established, Steppian had not only damaged the existing team, but hampered its future by selling off first-round draft picks in the years to come. Steppian's lasting NBA legacy is a bylaw that forbids teams from trading future first-round selections in consecutive drafts. It persists to this day. The more immediate effects of his mismanagement needed a more immediate remedy. So NBA lawyer David Stern made an unusual arrangement. The Cavs didn't receive their original picks back, but the Gunns were allowed to pay $500,000 to add a bonus Cavaliers pick to each of the next 4 drafts. This was an unprecedented act of pity, and some owners didn't like it, but everyone knew the Post-Steppan Cavs were embarking on a unique rescue mission. While George III carried on with the family's hockey investments, his brother Gordon became the face and principal decision-maker for that Cavs rescue. Gordon Gunn is an interesting guy. Accomplished, gregarious, philanthropic beyond measure, and by the time he took over the Cavs, completely unable to see because of a genetic condition called retinitis pigmentosa. Even without sight, Gunn became famous among reporters for his ability to connect with people and to command a room with incredible hearing and the ability to memorize the positions of people around him. For everything else, there was Joe Tate. In the summer of '83, Gunn rehired the beloved announcer Steppian had driven out of Cleveland for being too critical. The voice of the Cavaliers stuck around until his retirement just a few years ago, as it was meant to be. Gunn entrusted Tate's voice with matters of friendship, like mapping out the food on his dinner plate. And when it came to business, the owner knew he could count on Tate's radio call for an honest, vivid assessment of the on-court product. That product was kinda rough at the outset. World B. Free was the top performer in those early days, a scoring star too cool to worry about his hairline. Free did his best to put on a show during the mid-'80s transition period. Another Post-Steppan holdover was executive Harry Weltman, who stayed on as GM and gave George Karl his first NBA coaching job with the '84-'85 Cavaliers. Those Cavs finished 36-46 and actually made the postseason. Free led his younger teammates in a shockingly competitive series against Larry Bird's Celtics, but Cleveland fell in Game 4 against the eventual Eastern champions. To keep improving, the Cavs needed to nail the draft selections they'd bought from the NBA. As you know, that's how losing, unappealing teams fix themselves, by choosing new players who probably wouldn't have chosen them. But the front office led by Weltman wasted those first 3 bonus picks. Future All-Star Doc Rivers sat on the board when the Cavs picked 24th in 1983, but they passed on him. The Cavs famously lacked their 4th pick in the loaded 1984 draft and thus couldn't claim Charles Barkley, but they still could have snagged John Stockton at 12 and chose not to. In 1985, the Cavaliers had the chance to pick Karl Malone 9th. Instead, they selected Cleveland's own Charles Oakley, a fine enough pick until they dealt him to the Chicago Bulls in an inexplicable trade. By the end of the '85-'86 season, the Cavs were a normal basketball team, but not a good one. So they started from scratch. Weltman fired Coach Karl and then got fired himself. Gordon Gund had new leadership in mind. Wayne Embry was once an Ohio hoops star, high school, college, and pro. He went on to win a title with the 1968 Celtics, and soon after retirement, became the NBA's first black general manager with the excellent Milwaukee Bucks of the early 70s. When the Cavs job opened up in 1986, Embry was working for the Indiana Pacers. Despite his superior resume, Embry got passed over for a promotion to Indiana's open GM job, which instead went to Donnie Walsh. So when Gund came calling, Embry took an interview. It went poorly. A Cavs board member asked him a ridiculous question, albeit far from the worst racism Embry dealt with in his career before or after. Gund kept pressing though, and Embry eventually assented, agreeing to take over as Cavs general manager right after the '86 draft. Cleveland needed him sooner than that though. It was a big draft. The Cavs still owed their 7th pick to Dallas, but the Post-Steppan recovery scheme allowed them to purchase the pick right after it, number 8. They'd also heard the Philadelphia 76ers were willing to trade away the number 1 pick. So, with permission from the Pacers, Embry helped run 2 draft nights at once from his office in Indiana. For Cleveland, he approved a trade to get that number 1 pick, sending young Cavalier Roy Hinson to Philly for the opportunity to draft the best center in college basketball, UNC's Brad Daugherty. The 8th pick was a no-brainer. Versatile swingman Ron Harper was born and raised in Dayton, then broke some Embry scoring records at Miami of Ohio. Perfect fit. With his remote work complete, Embry spent the rest of the night on Pacers business. He set up a trade to acquire the Dallas Mavericks' 25th pick so Indiana could grab Georgia Tech point guard Mark Price. Just one thing. While Embry was on the phone conducting Pacers business, the Cavs were speaking to a different Mavericks executive, and they finalized a trade first. So without his input, Mark Price ended up with Embry's new team. That was kinda awkward for our friend Wayne, who got reamed out on his last day with the Pacers and waited a while for absolution. Oh well, Dallas kinda owed the Cavs for all that Steppian nonsense anyway. Once Embry officially moved to Cleveland, there sat the bounty of young talent he'd helped assemble. Daugherty, Harper, and Price, and the Cavs finally signed their 1985 draft pick, John Hot Rod Williams, who'd been away for a year dealing with the legal fallout of a college point shaving scandal. These 4 players, all recruited through the draft, would play a huge role in the Cavs' return to excellence. Daugherty was the centerpiece, with refined skills down low. Hot Rod his perfect complement at forward. Harper provided scoring from the wing, and Price would soon prove his brilliance at point guard. To lead them, Embry hired Lenny Wilkins, once an all-star and early Cavs player who'd since become a title-winning head coach. And yes, a black person. Eat shit, guy from the job interview. Eat shit, racist hate mail. In year 1, the Cavs lost games while the youngsters got their feet wet, but they still played some of the NBA's stingiest defense. In year 2, Embry accelerated progress by trading future for present. Like the Cavs of yesteryear, but with actual purpose. Cleveland sacrificed some young players, including sharp rookie Kevin Johnson, to acquire established veteran contributors. Larry Nance and Mike Sanders fleshed out an imposing front court rotation, one that allowed Coach Wilkins the flexibility to bring Hot Rod off the bench if he wanted. That did the trick. The '88 Cavs secured the franchise's first winning record since the '70s and returned to the playoffs. At long last, Cleveland was ready to compete. But with whom? Well, during the same years the Cavs pieced together a playoff-ready roster, their divisional neighbors rode a one-man skyrocket to the same point. The Chicago Bulls chose Michael Jordan with the 3rd selection in the 1984 NBA draft. By 1988, Jordan had become, the best player in the NBA, a phenom and an artist, the clear-cut league MVP and Defensive Player of the Year at age 25. Draft picks are the gift that keeps on giving, as long as you don't give away the gifts, Ted. In contrast to the balanced Cavs attack, the 87-88 Bulls watched Jordan average 35 points a night for the second straight season, just an astounding portion of scoring for one person. He'd hung 52 on the shorthanded Cavs during a regular season win in December. In a closer March contest, the Cavs swarmed Jordan's last shot, but Charles Oakley, the burly garbage collector originally drafted by Cleveland, tipped home the game winner. MJ did have some help, but Jordan's Bulls had been swiftly eliminated from the prior 3 postseasons. MJ had just one playoff game victory to his name, let alone a whole series win. So the MVP still had a lot to prove. He didn't want to be remembered as just a scorer for an also-ran team. To level up his reputation, Jordan would have to thwart these 6th-seeded Cavaliers, who were embarking on their own maiden playoff voyage. And good lord could that man thwart. Ron Harper was Cleveland's MJ specialist, but Harper had to sit Game 1 with a nagging ankle injury. Jordan dropped 50 points on the second stringer, Craig Elo. Easy Bulls win. Harper returned for Game 2, but look at him trying to fight over a screen. He wasn't himself. Before that game, MJ suggested he'd rather face Harper than Elo, which felt a little like trolling, but Jordan scored 55 in another Bulls win, so who am I to disagree? While MJ's excellence headlined the 2 wins in Chicago, the former Cleveland draft pick, Oakley, pitched in as rebounder and second scorer. Back in Cleveland for Game 3, Mark Price broke out for 31 points to command a win in his first career home playoff game. In Game 4, Harper took over. That was the beauty of these Cavs. Anyone could take the reins. Jordan put up his usual absurd numbers, but didn't get enough help from guys like Oakley. In the closing seconds of Game 4, Harper poached Scottie Pippen's inbound pass to Dave Corzine, some typical Cavs defense to secure the series tie. After a dormant decade, the playoff atmosphere crackled to life at Richfield Coliseum. It was palpable on the broadcast. Imagine you're Gordon Gund hearing this ecstatic Joe Tate call over the roar of the crowd.
Jordan goes with 7 seconds remaining. Harper goes to the line, and they're going to Chicago on Sunday.
But Chicago hosted the final win-or-go-home Game 5, and that decisive contest foreshadowed some of the dynasty to come. Jordan performed masterfully as usual, and Pippen, Chicago's unsung rookie, justified a surprise last-second starting nod, leading a comeback with the best performance of his young career. Cleveland had life in the final minute. Harper picked Jordan's pocket to feed a clean Price pull-up that cut Chicago's lead to 3. But next time down, Jordan and Oakley busted ass on the boards to ensure Game 5 would not come down to the last possession. 2 icy Jordan free throws clinched his first series victory, denying Wayne Embry's Cavs the same. But more opportunities ahead. Embry's roster had playoff experience now, and they were well positioned to run it back in '89. Only one rotation player departed, although given the nascent rivalry with MJ and the Bulls, it's notable that it was a 2-guard, young shooter Del Curry. Cleveland left Curry unprotected in an expansion draft, and the brand new Charlotte Hornets franchise snagged him. Cleveland stayed otherwise intact for the '89 campaign. The kids improved, the recently acquired vets got a full training camp, and the Cavs found sweet harmony. Wilkins commanded the second most efficient defense in the NBA. Nance's skyscraping blocks highlighted Cleveland's impenetrable interior. By February, the team once known as the Cleveland Cadavers held the league's best record. Wilkins thus got to coach the '89 Eastern All-Stars, which included a chunk of his own squad. Cleveland's keystone, Doherty, made his second straight appearance. Nance joined in for the first time since '85. And the third Cavalier All-Star really turned heads, Mark Price. The little guy whose '86 trade acquisition got Wayne Embry in trouble with the Pacers burst out as one of the best point guards in the NBA. Dead-eye shooting the ball, shifty handling and dishing it among the well-balanced Cavalier attack. No less than Isaiah Thomas, fellow All-Star point guard from the despised Detroit Pistons, was floored by Price's performance. Isaiah saw a guard quicker than himself, who'd risen from second-round pick to star incredibly fast. That little shit could flat out play. With all this going for them, the Cavs were the team on the rise. Magic Johnson had dubbed Cleveland the team of the 90s, but some experts were impressed right now, even predicting a title in '89. Isaiah's Pistons didn't love that, and made a point to not only beat the Cavs, but beat them up. In late February, Detroit big guy Rick Mahorn concussed Price with a deliberate-looking elbow, and Price wasn't quite himself the rest of the year. Before season's end, Detroit pulled ahead of Cleveland in the standings. But the playoffs mattered most, and before any potential Pistons matchup, the Cavs had to face a familiar first-round opponent in unfamiliar circumstances. These were different Bulls. Oakley was gone, MJ was at odds with coach Doug Collins, and Chicago had regressed to just 47 wins. Unlike in '88, Cleveland entered with a superior record, a convincing win streak against the Bulls, and home court advantage at Richfield. Some expected a Cavs sweep, but not for long. Price missed Game 1 of the 5-game series with an injured groin. Craig Elo started in place of Cleveland's leading scorer, and the Cavs just weren't the same team. Chicago stole Game 1 against an opponent Pippen described as dead without Price. But Harper broke out in Game 2 to secure a split at home, and after losing Game 3, the Cavs pulled off the unexpected in Game 4 at Chicago Stadium. Jordan dropped 50 on the Cavs yet again, but looked furious at himself for missing 2 of 4 crucial free throws in the last minute of regulation. In the midst of a disappointing offensive series, Doherty at least outshot Jordan from the free throw line in Game 4, including these 2 even-keeled makes that sent the game to overtime. In OT, Jordan fouled out, and the combined scoring of Nance, Price, and Harper carried the day. So Cleveland set up another do-or-die Game 5, at home this time, a major fork in the road. Wilkins had by this point committed to a taller lineup, one that forced Pippen to guard Larry Nance. But Game 5 was still an off night for Cleveland's bigs, who carried a variety of injuries. The guards kept the Cavs in it. Gritty performances from Harper and Price, and heroic scoring from the sixth man, Craig Elo. Chicago took a lead into the final minute after Jordan found Pippen for a corner 3 to just beat the shot clock. But Elo responded with a 3 of his own, and then got payback for this painful Jordan bucket. Wilkins drew up a gorgeous inbound give and go to spring Elo for the double clutch finish that put the Cavs up 1 with just seconds left. One stop would earn this Cleveland squad their first playoff series victory. Wilkins stuck Elo on Jordan to get that stop, and he did not. MJ hung in the air, seemingly forever, to cap a 44-point outing with this series-deciding bucket.
The Bulls win it! They win it!
A moment so famous that people just call it the shot. 1 year after failing to upset the Bulls, Cleveland got upset by the Bulls. They couldn't believe it. Said Ron Harper, "It is not over. I refuse to believe it is over." At least for him, it was over. Harper had always stood out a bit from the splendid '86 draft class that formed this team's foundation. Ron was a local guy with a newly minted local agent, Mark Termini, who fought hard for one of his first clients. Harper actually held out for a couple weeks of his first Cavs training camp until Termini and Wayne Embry could reach terms on a rookie contract. And playing where you grew up has its downsides. Embry and the Cavs heard rumors about Harper's friends and irritated him by fussing over the company he kept. Now 25 years old, Harper opened the 89-90 season on the verge of a breakout, Cleveland's best hope of rebounding from that brutal playoff defeat. Sparkling early numbers put Ron on pace to become an NBA All-Star in the same state where he'd won high school and college honors. But the voices whispering to Cavs management grew louder. League security got word that the DEA was poking around Harper's friends, that he might actually get subpoenaed as part of an investigation. Sports executives at the time were particularly sensitive to drug scandals. The NBA was still reeling from Len Bias's tragic death in 1986. In Cleveland, Don Rogers of the Browns died from an overdose the same month as Bias. Another Brown, Kevin Mack, got an obscene prison sentence for a cocaine bust that very summer. Some former Cavaliers had been part of the sprawling Phoenix Suns drug scandal in '87. So when he was apprised of a potential investigation, Gordon Gunn made his mind up instantly. Embry dithered and Wilkins pleaded, but Gunn wanted Harper gone, now. Embry was compelled to trade a celebrated local talent at the top of his game. The decision made everyone miserable, Coach Wilkins especially. And the eventual trade was grim in basketball terms too. This is not the name you want invoked after a Cleveland transaction. The desperate Cavs found their taker in the mediocre Los Angeles Clippers, who also milked some draft picks out of the deal. Harper, who had no say in his move, played some excellent years in LA, even after tearing his ACL. Later on, when he gained free agency, Harper chose a new role alongside this old friend of the Cavs. The drug stuff never amounted to much. The agent, Mark Termini, would never let the Cavs forget that. Harper maintains to this day that the Cavs could have won titles in the 90s if they only kept him. Let's see what actually happened. Cleveland's return package in the '89 trade centered around an important figure in our story, Danny Ferry. LA had picked the Duke star second in the 1989 draft, but Ferry bailed on them to play in Italy, and he would not return in season. Embry predicted, or perhaps prayed, that Ferry would be worth the delay, like some others who didn't join the NBA immediately. While they waited, the sullen, depleted 1990 Cavaliers struggled. They hadn't exactly planned for Harper's departure, having lost utility forward Mike Sanders and backfilled with young guys meant for the bench, like Steve Kerr and Chucky Brown. And to make matters worse, health betrayed our protagonists. Doherty and Nance endured difficult recoveries from off-season surgery, and Price opened the season hurt as well. Cleveland ended up losing 40 games, including all 5 of their meetings with the Bulls. As if to jab his thumb in the hole vacated by Ron Harper, Jordan scored a career-high 69 points against Craig Elo and friends at Richfield in March. The Cavaliers made the playoffs, but the Sixers took care of them in the first round. Chicago and Detroit battled for the East, while the Cavs could only watch. The '91 season was worse. It took a substantial salary to retrieve Ferry from Europe. That deal, plus a generous new contract to prevent restricted free agent Hot Rod Williams from departing, put the Cavaliers well over the salary cap. Too bad, because while Ferry played an adequate enough career in Cleveland, his knees were in bad shape and his performance never came close to justifying the Harper trade. Hot Rod injured his foot early in the '91 season and ended up playing just 43 games. Price's year was cut short by a torn ACL. Lenny Wilkins' once elite defense fell below league average, and the Cavs finished just 33-49. The team of the 90s missed the 1991 playoffs. Jordan and company planted their flag in the decade by winning the title. And then, 5 more of them. No matter what the Cavaliers did, the Bulls never let them get any closer than they got in 1989. And it's not like Cleveland stayed bad. Lottery-picked point guard Terrell Brandon brought some extra burst in 1992. That was just icing on the cake of a bounce-back year for the vets. Price in particular looked shockingly great after ACL surgery, picking and rolling with a healthy frontcourt. The 92 Cavs won a regular season game by the largest margin in NBA history. Cleveland racked up 148 points without a single individual cracking 20, a perfect encapsulation of the ensemble effort that made them great. Those revitalized Cavs went on to win their first playoff series under Wilkins, with Doherty playing some of his best ball to outgun Drazen Petrovic and the Nets. Then came a grueling second-round win against the fading Larry Bird Celtics. A bit later than expected, the Cavs had arrived. Unfortunately, the Bulls never left. 1992 Eastern Conference Finals. Cleveland actually snatched an early road win against Chicago, but squandered it. They got an uneven MJ outing in Game 6, but squandered it. Nance dominated Game 6, and Price gutted through a bum ankle, but the point guard dribbled off his foot on a crucial play in the final minute. Yet another Cavaliers season ended against Chicago, at home, in defeat. The Harper trade haunted the Cavs, not just because they lacked a star wing to battle MJ in that conference final loss, but because they felt stuck in place. Even though the 91-92 roster finally punched through to the conference finals and earned Embry Executive of the Year, it still wasn't enough to match Chicago, and high salary left little room to improve. Adding Gerald Wilkins wasn't going to change Cleveland's fortune in the 1993 playoffs. This time, the Bulls swept the Cavs in the second round. Despite a sprained wrist, Jordan ended that series on yet another contested dagger of a jump shot, in front of 21,000 heartbroken Cleveland fans, again.
This crowd is stunned!
By the end of its life, Richfield Coliseum belonged to MJ. Even during Jordan's baseball days, the Bulls prevailed. The Cavs got a new coach in Mike Fratello and some new young contributors, but the front court injuries resurfaced. Chicago swept Cleveland again in the 1994 playoffs. Because of those injuries, 94 marked the final career games for both Nance and the much younger Doherty. Price and Hot Rod were the only members of that late 80s core to join the Cavs in their move to Gund Arena in downtown Cleveland, and to wear these jerseys, which I gotta say have grown on me over the years. Coach Fratello leaned on younger lineups, but filled that new arena with the slowest, muddiest basketball you'll ever see. The Cavs settled into middling seasons that ended with either a first-round exit, or in the case of 1997, defeat in a do-or-die Game 82 of the regular season, which could have clinched the 8 seed. Stung by the unfulfilled promise of the 90s, Cavs ownership felt the itch to just go get a superstar, an MJ of their own. It wasn't yet obvious, but Cleveland had royally whiffed a prime opportunity to get that guy in the 1996 draft. That night, the Cavs selected Vitaly Potapenko 12th overall. Kobe Bryant was still on the board, and Peja Stojakovic, and Steve Nash. It looks pretty bad in retrospect. When you fail to choose the superstar that fell in your lap and can't persuade a superstar to choose you, you gotta force the issue. Gordon Gund was done waiting, done settling for Plan B. He wanted the guy, or as close to that as possible. The reluctant Embry thus swung a 1997 trade for disgruntled Sonics forward Shaun Kemp, who Cleveland convinced to stick around with a huge new contract offer. The move earned Embry another Executive of the Year award, but while the Cavs' pricey new star kept them above water, he didn't take them anywhere of note. Injuries and Kemp's declining condition prevented any renewed cohesion between youth and experience. The Cavs missed the playoffs of the 1999 lockout season, and soon thereafter, Gund cleaned house again. He fired Fratello and pushed Embry to resign the same year he entered the Hall of Fame. The Cavaliers crossed into the new millennium with new management, new coaching, and a roster in flux around the founder and Kemp. Ohio guy Jim Paxson took over and emptied the tank in order to, tank. Cleveland re-earned their old nickname with a squad comprising grumpy cast-offs and youngsters learning on the fly. There was promise, but not nearly enough. By 2003, the Cleveland Cavaliers owned, for the first time since the Steppan years, the worst record in the NBA. Gordon Gund had saved them. Wayne Embry had rebuilt them in a flash, and Lenny Wilkens had led them. But injuries, desperate trades, and one bad man in red had snuffed their promise to become the team of the 90s. The Cavs exited the century hollow, barren, dead, again. And yet, here we are. The 2016 Cavs are full of talent, enough to win a championship if the next few seconds pass without mishap. Just seconds ago, Kevin Love, a player Cleveland acquired by trade, faced a tough matchup in the critical possession following Kyrie Irving's three-pointer. Actually, this scene surfaces a long thread of Cavaliers history. Tug that thread with me for just a second. Remember Dick Snyder, hero of the 1976 Miracle at Richfield? Well, a couple years after he hit that game winner against Washington, Snyder signed with Seattle. Cleveland got a couple draft picks as compensation for his departure. That's how it worked back then. The Cavaliers used one of those compensatory draft picks to select Bill Laimbeer. You remember him. In 1982, Ted Stepien traded the future All-Star to Detroit, which was bad, but in return, our friend Ted got a rare first-round draft pick. With that 12th pick in the 1982 draft, the Cavs selected John Bagley, the dude who scouts ranked so much lower that they thought the pick was a joke. Remember that? Stay with me. So Bagley actually ended up being pretty decent, and in 1987, the Cavs used him in a 3-team trade to acquire a guard coming off an intriguing rookie year in Utah. That was Del Curry, who played a very promising sophomore season with the 87-88 Cavaliers. At age 23, Curry broke out as one of the league's better three-point shooters. He could have meant a lot to Cleveland, especially once they traded Ron Harper. But we know what happened in the 1988 expansion draft. Cavs GM Wayne Embry made the tough, regrettable decision to leave Del Curry unprotected. He chose instead to secure Chris Dudley, a shitty backup big man from Yale who'd once been the bar fight partner of some kid named Brett Kavanaugh. In claiming the mistakenly unprotected Curry, Charlotte didn't just add an exciting young shooter to their new NBA franchise. Del had just welcomed his first son to the world. Wardell Curry II was born at Akron General Medical Center in March of 1988. But because of his dad's job transfer, Wardell II grew up in North Carolina. In North Carolina, he became a high school basketball standout. In North Carolina, he played his way from obscure recruit to national star at Tiny Davidson College. The Golden State Warriors drafted Dell's son 7th in 2009, and he developed gradually into one of the sharpest shooting, slickest handling point guards ever to play basketball. And you've probably figured out by now that Wardell Curry II goes by his middle name. The baby gestated in Utah and born in Ohio, but raised in North Carolina because the Cavs wanted to keep Chris Dudley, grew up to become Stephen Curry. This guy. Moments ago, Curry was in position to match Kyrie Irving's dagger 3. This is his office, his hunting ground. Steph lives to pull up from deep in the clutch, as he demonstrated with a world-class finish just a few months ago in OKC.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
Mike Breen's voice probably still hurts from that call, but you know he was getting ready for another bang moment. Because, yeah, this was a dangerous matchup. horrifying for Cavalier fans. Kevin Love has been many things to Cleveland, but lockdown perimeter defender is not one of those things. Love scrambled to force a bailout pass, but Curry retrieved the ball from Draymond Green, pulled a few moves, and...
crossover, puts up a three! Rebound James!
Phew. Bullet dodged. Admirable defense from Love. The Cavaliers kept the lead and regained possession when the rebound fell to another person born at Akron General Medical Center. This person remained in Ohio and became the light at the end of a dark tunnel. While the greatest player of the 1990s destroyed Cavalier hopes, the greatest player of a new generation was growing just a few miles away. It's time to meet LeBron James. By the end of the 20th century, Gordon Gunn's Cavaliers roster looked bloated and aimless, far removed from the harmonious late 1980s teams. Cleveland management had little choice but to start over by dumping Shaun Kemp's huge contract and rebuilding through that all-important life raft for sinking franchises, the NBA draft lottery. But Jim Paxson's front office didn't exactly nail those lottery picks. In the 2000 draft, Cleveland traded Jamal Crawford for Chris Mim. Bad. They drafted Sagana Diop over Joe Johnson in 2001. Bad. That's multiple overrated big guys, and then when an actual great one, Amari Stoudemire, fell to the Cavs in 2002, they instead selected DeJuan Wagner, whose promising career would derail because of unfortunate health issues. Cleveland remained in the doldrums and sunk to rock bottom in 02-03. Nothing illustrates this wretched period quite like a notorious Ricky Davis goof. In a game near the end of a rancid 03 season, Davis found himself one rebound away from a triple-double, so he intentionally missed a shot on his own basket to try to get that 10th board. Deshaun Stevenson showed Ricky how he felt about that. That's the same Ricky Davis who busted out a clean between-the-legs dunk in the final seconds of a blowout loss. Spectacular. This is how the Cavs of the early 2000s made headlines, as a sideshow, again. They weathered accusations of tanking on purpose, but deliberate or not, there was a good reason to finish the 02-03 season with just 17 wins. LeBron James was born in the same hospital as Steph Curry, but unlike Wardell II, young LeBron remained in Ohio. By the early 2000s, he had already become quite famous. As a high school underclassman, James had overshadowed older, better-known competition at camps. Leading an excellent St. Vincent St. Mary's high school team, James floored observers not only with his physical attributes, but with his ingenious, enlivening approach to basketball. The towering forward looked athletic enough to simply overwhelm opponents, but loved to read the floor, manipulate the action, and invent easy plays for everyone. The kid was a savant. Scouts, executives, and media just shit their little pants. On this famous 2002 cover, Sports Illustrated called LeBron James the chosen one. Pretty reckless label to foist on a 17-year-old kid. They predicted James could be a lottery pick even in that year's draft, and LeBron had genuinely considered leaving high school early to prove them right. James actually joined the nearby Cavaliers for a workout during his junior year, a stunt that got Cavs coach John Lucas suspended for the first couple games of Cleveland's 02-03 Tank Fest. Ultimately, LeBron stuck around to win one more state title as a senior, then declared for the 2003 draft as the headliner of a stacked prospect class. All of this from a kid born like 40 miles from Gund Arena. So yeah, the 03 Cavs could stomach a season of the alpha Ricky Davis experience in exchange for a 22.5% chance of getting the top lottery pick. The lottery offered some compelling consolation prizes, but the opportunity to choose the chosen one, to keep LeBron in Ohio, had Cavaliers owner Gordon Gund thrilled. On lottery night in May, a Cavs executive witnessed Gund shaking with apprehension about the drawing. The executive reminded Gund of his greater life goals, like curing the disease that impaired his vision. Winning a draft lottery isn't like finding a cure for blindness. Responded Gund, it's pretty damn close. He so badly wanted that chance to draft first. Fate favored the Cavaliers. Or weighted lottery odds favored them, whichever. As soon as the envelope for the second selection revealed a non-Cavs logo, Clevelanders erupted in excitement. TV cameras caught Austin Carr, Cleveland's first ever number 1 pick from 1971, weeping with joy at the Cavs lottery party. And in a move you absolutely never see, Gund unfurled a rebranded, personalized Cavs jersey. New colors, new logo, already stitched with LeBron's name and number, right there at the lottery. Cleveland had prepared a prop to celebrate this unlikely outcome, one that wouldn't even pay off until the following month's draft. That is how special a prospect LeBron James was. The feeling wasn't 100% mutual. Staying home was cool, but James had been paying attention to the actual team. The wanton roster depletion, the hideous basketball it took for Cleveland to win his rights, also made them a pretty unattractive employer. But even one of the most accomplished teenagers in basketball history didn't have much leeway. Such is the irony of the NBA draft. James's future teammates described the forthcoming prodigy like he was just another new supporting player there to make them look better. This old local news broadcast is a wonderful document of people underestimating LeBron.
We have better players than him in his position already on our team, bro. Saying he can just hop on our bandwagon.
LeBron's rookie season instantly changed that tone. It was clear that the Cavs finally had the guy, and equally clear, beginning with Game 1, that they needed to restructure around him. Cleveland did employ 2 good frontcourt players they'd acquired with late draft picks. Thank God for that, because the rest of the roster looked bleak. New coach Paul Silas didn't have much to work with. Recent lottery pick DeJuan Wagner spent a lot of time sidelined, so the Cavs straight up didn't have a point guard. LeBron had to fill that role. And the scorers Cleveland depended on during their 02-03 tank sesh clearly weren't going to fit. So Jim Paxson cleared Ricky Davis out of the way quickly, then dealt Darius Miles to bring in a new ball handler, Jeff McInnes. Paxson didn't consult LeBron before these moves, but he was pleased to get the rookie's approval. Meanwhile, that rookie continued to live up to the extreme hype. James produced some rough shooting nights, exposing the one prominent weakness in his developing game. But he also did some shit teenagers aren't supposed to do, like dropping 41, 13, and 6 in a come-from-behind victory against the Nets. A special rookie and his big sidekicks won 35 games. Huge improvement, though not quite enough to drag the rest of the roster into the 2004 postseason. Still, they gave Paxson a foundation. With better guard play, including a hopeful Wagner return, the Cavs could get cooking. They had to, because a nascent superstar represents a ticking clock. It wouldn't be long before James moved from his rookie contract to enjoying some free agent rights. Cleveland needed to build a winner around him and get the hell out of the lottery ASAP. Step 1 there was obvious: pay Carlos Boozer. The rapidly improving power forward had been a second-round draft pick and thus made relatively little money. If unattended, Boozer would soon enter free agency. He could select his team and finally sign a big contract to match his burgeoning talent. The Cavs planned to just preempt all that by paying Boozer right now to commit long-term. Accounts of what happened next vary, but the upshot is that before 04 free agency began, Boozer and his agent, Rob Pelinka, met with Gordon Gund and the Cavaliers. they reached a sort of handshake agreement, something illegal under NBA rules if formalized. The Cavs would decline the low-paying option years remaining on Boozer's existing contract. This would certainly alarm fans, but then Cleveland would immediately sign Boozer to a big new contract. As this transpired, Boozer told the public he wanted to remain in Cleveland. But July moved along and less accomplished big men were signing contracts richer than the one Cleveland promised Boozer. So Carlos couldn't help but shop around, and he eventually signed a 6-year, $68 million offer sheet with the Utah Jazz. Technically, Boozer was a restricted free agent, so the Cavs could match that salary and keep him. In reality, $68 million was way more than they'd budgeted, way more than they thought all parties had agreed to. The Cavs thus decided to let LeBron's best teammate walk away. Gordon Gund immediately engaged his version of damage control, an open letter. Gund sympathized with fans' disappointment. He had believed in Carlos. Gund gave his version of events with direct quotes about respect and trust that Boozer supposedly did not reciprocate. He explained why Cleveland was choosing not to match Utah's lucrative offer, because the expense would have significant negative impact on the team. So, the first offseason of building around LeBron James was wrecked from the beginning. Paxson tried and failed to convince 40-year-old former MVP Karl Malone to come on board. The Cavs settled for trades to add a solid point guard, Eric Snow, and a decent enough Boozer replacement in Drew Gooden, although that trade would end up paying off more on its margins. Meanwhile, Cleveland's other rising prospect never returned to form. Bad luck faded DeJuan Wagner's star potential before the age of 24. Cleveland's 2004 lottery pick, Luke Jackson, hardly contributed. The decision to select Jackson stood out when some lower drafted players outperformed him. This guy, actually. Still not as bad as when the pre-LeBron Cavaliers drafted this guy, Vitaly Potapenko, now an assistant coach, over Kobe Bryant. Anyway, point is, even an improving LeBron wasn't enough for the barely fortified 05 Cavs. James logged the most minutes of any NBA player, became an all-star at age 20, and joined big names like Allen Iverson and Kobe Bryant atop the scoring chart. But he couldn't improve the Cavaliers' standing in a tough Central Division. That season is well represented by a game on March 20th, 2005, when LeBron broke the franchise scoring record to pour 56 points on the Raptors, plus 10 rebounds and 5 assists just for funsies, and Cleveland still couldn't win. Even the most scintillating young star needs help. Affable human fire tower Zydrunas Ilgauskas picked, popped, and defended his way to an 05 All-Star berth, but Big Z was not productive enough to be the second best player on a team with any prayer of contending. After a 30-20 start, Cleveland slumped out of the All-Star break and fell just short of the 2005 playoffs. The Cavs did have room to grow, but the regime that welcomed LeBron wouldn't be the one to carry out that project. Gordon Gund was well into his 60s and ready to focus on his philanthropic endeavors. He reached out to David Stern, who'd been NBA commissioner since around the time he brokered Gund's team acquisition back in 1983. Over 2 decades later, Gund wanted Stern to find the next owner of the Cavaliers. The commish knew just the guy. Unlike Ted Stepien and Gordon Gund, Dan Gilbert claimed minimal connection to Cleveland, Ohio. But just like them, he had way too much money. Gilbert's personal mythology describes a Detroit kid scrapping his way from modest real estate business into big-time mortgage lending. In the 80s, Gilbert founded a company called Rock Financial. Several decades, a sale, a reacquisition, and some grimy scandals later, you probably know it as the powerful and ubiquitous Quicken Loans. By the 2000s, this little chief owned billions of dollars, NBA franchise money. With Stern's enthusiastic guidance, Dan Gilbert used almost $400 million of those dollars to buy majority ownership in the Cavaliers. It didn't take long for Gilbert to paste over all the gun branding with Quicken Loan stuff. And Gilbert's makeover went far deeper. GM Jim Paxson had the Cavs roster positioned to improve in the summer of '05, and Coach Silas had them playing organized, if not victorious ball. But those two were at odds with one another, and they weren't Gilbert's guys. To replace them, Gilbert followed a tried and true strategy: hire people who have worked for the San Antonio Spurs. Cleveland's new coach, Mike Brown, who'd won a ring as an assistant with San Antonio, then spent a few years engineering the Indiana Pacers' monstrous defense under Rick Carlisle. Brown's boss, the Cavs' new general manager, was, "Hey, we know this guy." Danny Ferry first came to Cleveland in the Cavaliers' desperate, ill-fated move to dump Ron Harper entering 1990. Ferry had a fine Cavs career, albeit nowhere near good enough to justify that critical trade. Ferry played his last few seasons for Greg Popovich, then joined the Spurs front office. He took a Cavs interview in '05 with no intention of leaving San Antonio, but Ferry hit it off with Gilbert and ended up accepting his first general manager job. So this guy, who had little choice over his role in the Cavs' past, now got to determine the Cavs' future, and he had no time to waste. Since they never paid Carlos Boozer, the Cavaliers possessed enough salary cap space to sign the best members of an exciting 2005 free agent class. To help Coach Brown get the most out of LeBron James, and to ensure James would extend his first contract, Ferry had to convince talented players to choose Cleveland. The Cavs' own Zydrunas Ilgauskas was part of that group. Ferry needed to retain the center, whose Cavs career went so far back that he'd once been Ferry's teammate. Ilgauskas had planned to vacation in China while mulling free agency offers, but the Cavs were not going to let him slip away like Boozer did. Dan Gilbert and Mike Brown bought first-class plane tickets just so they could intercept Zydrunas and his wife during their layover at the Los Angeles airport. The team owner and coach hustled through security, which drew some TSA attention since they had no luggage. Then they sprinted around LAX trying to find Big Z, only to realize they were in the wrong terminal. Gilbert and Brown hopped in a van to find the right terminal, went through security again, paused to buy Zydrunas' wife some flowers and a balloon that said "I love you," then finally found their guy, presumably the only 7'3" person in the airport. Gilbert and Brown gave the Ilgauskases the gifts, bought them lunch, then made an offer. It worked. Before he boarded his connecting flight, Ilgauskas contacted his agent with instructions to get the deal done. Brown compared the successful mission to Spy Kids 3, specifically the third one. So the Cavs successfully defended against further pilfering of their front court. To reinforce the backcourt, they'd need to go on the offensive. Fortunately, some excellent high-scoring NBA guards were seeking new contracts: Joe Johnson, Ray Allen, and Ohio native Michael Redd. Johnson was a restricted free agent, so the incumbent Phoenix Suns could make acquiring him difficult. They ended up trading him to the Hawks for more than Cleveland would offer. Johnson fulfilled his all-star potential in Atlanta. The older Allen and Redd were true free agents, and Cleveland pursued them hard. LeBron recorded each player a pitch video in hopes of attracting a veteran co-star. But while unrestricted free agency gives players the right to choose, the NBA's labor agreement uses maximum salary rules to incentivize staying with your previous team. Allen and Redd got paid and stayed put. So Danny Ferry's first big swings as Cavaliers GM didn't make contact. But with cash to burn and a mandate to build around LeBron, Ferry felt compelled to go get someone. Larry Hughes was a combo guard entering his prime after a solid two-way season in Washington. He was also a spotty shooter with a history of injuries. Hughes had spent a lot of games on the sideline in his large shirt. The Cavs made that guy their highest paid player for 2006, inking Hughes to basically the same long-term deal they offered the more illustrious Michael Redd. Rounding out this free agent haul were some shooters: a big sleepy one in Donyell Marshall, and a little spunky one in Damon Jones. Pretty underwhelming outcome to the critical summer of 2005, the first offseason under Gilbert and Ferry. And Cleveland's biggest signing, Hughes, went on to miss a chunk of his first Cavaliers season because of a messed up finger. Thankfully, the Cavs still had LeBron. After becoming Rookie of the Year at 19 and an All-Star at 20, LeBron turned 21, threw himself a party, and then became arguably the best player in the NBA. James averaged a career-high 31 points per game in 05-06, attacking within a Mike Brown offense that could now deploy shooters to generate space and top 10 efficiency. In February, LeBron was All-Star Game MVP. In March, he punctuated a 37-point triple-double by burying the first buzzer-beating game winner of his career, a confident jab and leaner from 20 feet out. The jumper was coming along. This one earned win number 39 for Cleveland. In April, the Cavaliers hit 50 wins for the first time since the days of Lenny Wilkens and the Richfield Coliseum. LeBron led Cleveland to their first postseason berth since 1998. They secured the 4 seed in a matchup with the Washington Wizards. Playoff time. LeBron's first ever playoff game, a high-pressure milestone in any star's career, was a cakewalk. He piloted a clean Cavs victory with a 32-point triple-double, including nearly as many assists as field goals. LeBron won Game 3 of that series by outlasting Wizards superstar Gilbert Arenas in a bucket-for-bucket showdown in the final seconds. The debut performer commanded this new stage. But if LeBron slipped even a little, like a rough shooting night in Game 2 or a high turnover outing in Game 4, then so did the Cavaliers. So he stopped slipping. James ladled 45 points on the Wizards in Game 5, including this impressive tightrope act of a buzzer beater for the win. In Game 6, Damon Jones hit the 3 that put the Wizards away for good. The Cavaliers won their first playoff series since 1993. Soon thereafter, the NBA announced its 2006 Most Valuable Player, Steve Nash. Nash's second straight award prevented James from being the youngest MVP ever. Remember, by the way, that the Cavaliers chose not to draft this guy when given the opportunity. Or this guy. Or this guy, as a matter of fact. Sorry. Anyway, the 06 Cavs advanced to face the top-seeded Detroit Pistons in round 2. The Pistons picked one spot after LeBron back in the 03 lottery, but they'd been doing pretty okay since then, with 2 straight finals appearances, including the 2004 title. And here in the 06 conference semifinals, their vaunted defense knew whom to swarm. LeBron mustered enough excellence to stretch the series to 7 games, but especially in the elimination game, nary a Cavalier stepped up to support him. Cleveland's Game 7 score looked like something from the 1940s. Check out the points distribution from that game, just the total inverse of a Cavs box score from the Lenny Wilkens era. So things ended on a sour note, but given the kinda limp 05 offseason, the Cavs felt pretty good about the tangible progress on the court. And LeBron validated their good feelings by signing up for more. He had spent the last year or so changing agents, hiring friends, consulting with Jay-Z, and, well, all that culminated in a contract extension signed in the summer of 2006. Interestingly, James didn't extend for the maximum 5 years. The contract ended with an optional 4th year. The Cavaliers' clock now ticked toward 2010. Onward. 06-07. Basically the same rotation, just replacing a guard called Flip Murray with a guard called Boobie Gibson. Hi, Boobie. Larry Hughes wasn't really healthy, but he played more, and some youngsters embraced substantial roles. The Cavs still depended on LeBron a great deal, at least on offense. It didn't always look great, but by regular season's end, Brown's signature defensive coaching registered. While the Cavs merely matched the prior season's win total of 50, Cleveland entered the 2007 playoffs with a reputation for devouring opposing scorers. The Wizards, beset by injuries, never had a prayer in a first-round sweep. The Nets went down in 6, Vince Carter flummoxed by the Cleveland defense. So here was another first for LeBron and the 21st century Cavaliers, the Eastern Conference Finals. Their opponent was familiar. The Pistons no longer featured defensive superstar Ben Wallace, but they still held the 1 seed and were still well equipped to bombard LeBron, to dare another Cavalier to beat them. In games 1 and 2, that worked. Those games were ugly. The Pistons barely scored points, but succeeded in dragging the Cavs down with them. LeBron couldn't even crack 20, and Cleveland's outside shooting failed to cover the difference. In Game 1, LeBron raised eyebrows by passing up the big shot over help defense, dishing to an open game winner for Donyell Marshall, who missed. In Game 2, LeBron wanted to take the final shot, but the Pistons defense smothered him. So Game 3 at home was big, and LeBron treated it that way. He just kind of refused the defense and took over for a crisp 32 points. In the fourth quarter of a tied game, this chest-to-chest yam sandwich upon Rasheed Wallace sent a message to the fans in the arena. I am LeBron James. I have decided that my team, your team, will win this basketball game. LeBron created plenty of opportunities for others, but when it came down to it and the Pistons remained close, the kid called his own number, drew a switch, and closed the book. That's the kind of performance that gets the opponent complimenting you. The kind that gets your coach to admit he basically handed you the keys. But friends, that wasn't even the game. Neither was Game 4, in which LeBron's big fourth quarter and a key bench performance from Gibson tied the series. The game, the night the world really, truly found out about LeBron James, was Game 5. At home in the Palace of Auburn Hills, in front of 22,000 boisterous Detroit fans and Kid Rock, the Pistons outplayed the Cavs. They really did. LeBron did his best to keep everyone engaged, but Hughes was limping through a foot injury and the other guards couldn't hit. In the fourth, the Cavs fell apart. Rip Hamilton led a Pistons free throw parade that produced 10 unanswered points. Detroit could feel the contest and the series swinging in their direction. They held a 7-point lead with 3 minutes to go. And then LeBron just ate the game. The whole building. Nobody else existed except LeBron James. First, he crossed up Hamilton and finished lefty to make it 5. After an empty Pistons possession, LeBron demanded the ball. This is a 22-year-old, then simply pulled up from 26 feet. After Verjão's quick hands forced this turnover, LeBron continued his solo, freezing Jason Maxiell off the dribble for a dunk. Miraculously, the Cavs had regained the lead, but Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups, drilled an eponymous big shot, just a dagger through the inflating Cleveland balloon. Game 5 thus presented LeBron the same scenario that bedeviled him in the first 2 road games. One decisive possession with less than a shot clock left. The Pistons were clearly going to overplay him. Would he force a tough shot? Would he pass? It had been minutes of game time since another Cavalier even held the ball on offense. Detroit coach Flip Saunders cleverly arranged his defense so that a pick would switch sprawling noodle man Tayshaun Prince onto LeBron. But the All-NBA defender looked away for like half a second, which was half a second too many.
Down to 10. James with the step. And the game is tied at 91 with 9.5 to go.
That scorpion strike took Game 5 to overtime, where LeBron matched the Pistons by scoring all of Cleveland's points. Nobody else even attempted a shot until the buzzer. James drew fouls. He used Big Z for an easy bucket, and then he faced down a chance to maybe put the game away. Look at this. Look at this offense. If you squint, you could convince yourself LeBron is playing 1-on-5. When a pick arrived, the Pistons basically treated him that way, hounding LeBron with multiple defenders to force a pass. But on this night, no force surpassed that of LeBron. 4-point game.
James has to fire and scores! Oh my! What a shot by LeBron James!
Nevertheless, Detroit hung around. Free throws bought them a second overtime. LeBron had played 45 minutes. He'd scored 16 straight points by himself. Did he really have 5 more minutes of this in the tank? As a matter of fact, he did. Defended perfectly by Prince, he did. Pestered by Billups, he did. Over 2 defenders from 25 feet out, fading to his left, he did. When LeBron squared up with seconds left in a tied contest, it had been almost 18 game minutes since another Cavalier made a field goal. The moment LeBron moved, 5 goalkeepers converged, and LeBron just sliced right through them. This is LeBron. The strength to absorb contact, the finesse to make the backboard his accomplice. Kinda shitty defense here too. When Mr. Big Shot betrayed his name, LeBron had officially done it. The 22-year-old held off the Detroit Pistons by himself. His 48 points included an astonishing 25 straight. And the Pistons were toast. Cleveland whomped them in Game 6 at home. LeBron finally got to ease off the gas while Daniel Gibson put on a spectacular shooting performance, scoring 31 points. For the first time in their 37 years of existence, thanks almost entirely to a homegrown, tank-secured, draft-selected prodigy, the Cleveland Cavaliers made the NBA Finals. All the suffering, all the uncertainty built to this moment. And then the Cavs got absolutely fucking mopped in the finals. The tip-top San Antonio Spurs defense swallowed LeBron. His teammates filled out one of the worst offensive outputs in history. The 07 finals sucked. Still, the Cavs had cleared another bar. They were finalists and could stay that way because the conference now belonged to them. Detroit proved mortal, Miami was fracturing, the East's other young centerpieces just weren't LeBron. So Danny Ferry and the Cavs stood pat. The draft certainly wasn't going to help them. They'd already traded their first-round pick for a guy who'd never play another NBA game. A new trade for scoring point guard Mike Bibby simmered but didn't cook. The Cavs entered the 07-08 season with virtually the same rotation, but hey, that group had gotten them to the finals, so what's the problem? Well, a couple problems. These teams did not stand pat. They kept building, enough to withstand the Cavs in each of the next 3 postseasons. In June 2007, Boston Celtics GM Danny Ainge found a way to accomplish what Cleveland's Danny had not. Boston acquired elite bucket generator Ray Allen as a sidekick for the star they'd once drafted, Paul Pierce. A few days later, Boston swung a huge trade for recent MVP Kevin Garnett. Suddenly, Pierce enjoyed the company of 2 teammates way more talented than anyone who had ever joined LeBron. The Celtics had their so-called Big Three. As the season progressed, breakout point guard Rajon Rondo made that an arguable 4. While those Celtics found their footing, the Cavs stagnated, deteriorated even. Anderson Varejao held out over contract issues, and Cleveland's injury list grew to include LeBron's finger. During the games he missed, the reigning Eastern champions actually fell below the 500 mark. Execution of Mike Brown's defense slipped. The offense was outright bad. Cleveland only got back in the win column because LeBron returned to orchestrate everything. His near-spotless performance somehow sharpened. It took all-out LeBron excellence to get anything done, like this stretch in January 2008. The 23-year-old put up 31 points and 19 boards in 50 minutes to barely outlast the stinky Charlotte Bobcats in double overtime. A few nights later, James had to score 51 to beat the even worse Memphis Grizzlies in OT. A year or two from free agency, LeBron was frustrated. He wanted help like Paul Pierce. Specifically, LeBron wanted the help of star point guard Jason Kidd, who had just requested a trade from the New Jersey Nets. When it sounded like the Nets instead had a deal with the Mavericks, LeBron could barely hide his disappointment from media. He wanted to win, more, now. Desperate to satisfy their star, the Cavs finally did something, lunging into the most complex trade of a busy 08 deadline season. Danny Ferry sent a chunk of the starting lineup to Chicago. Cleveland got back Ben Wallace, who had regressed considerably since his Detroit days, plus, thankfully, a couple solid Seattle perimeter players, Delonte West and Wally Szczerbiak. Big move, but you look around at who else switched teams during that time and I don't know, man. The trade didn't really change Cleveland's fortunes. They finished 08 with 45 wins and after beating the Wizards, couldn't overcome the Celtics' shiny new Big Three in the playoffs. LeBron yet again had to weather an excellent defense by himself and did a pretty incredible job pressing the series to 7 games. But Game 7 epitomized the Cavs' fatal flaw. While James labored for 45 points, former Celtic Delonte West was the only other player to even crack double figures in a 5-point loss. Boston's new Big Three went on to win the 2008 championship, completing the greatest single-season improvement in NBA history. LeBron's Cavs had declined with 2010 on the horizon. Dan Gilbert insisted he wasn't worried about free agency, but with a superstar casually dropping the phrase personnel changes, Danny Ferry knew he had more work to do in the summer of 08. Easier said than done, since prior moves and basic housekeeping left Cleveland without space to just go out and sign great players. Ferry, to his credit, pulled off a shrewd late summer move, exchanging bench players for Mo Williams, a smooth little guard who could create and hit shots. This pleased LeBron. Alongside LeBron, Williams found himself free to hover behind the arc, where he put up a career-best three-point percentage. At the same time, Delonte West and Wally Szczerbiak, who'd arrived with Ben Wallace at the prior deadline, settled into their roles, enjoying the opportunities one gets in the company of the king. LeBron finally had a decent backcourt. Williams joined LeBron on the 09 Eastern All-Star team, albeit as an injury replacement for Chris Bosh. Among these Cavs, LeBron could finally dial down his volume and share the touches. But don't get me wrong, he still had the green light to take over when he wanted or needed to. One night in February 09 stands out. LeBron got bored or frustrated or I don't know what happened, but he just decided to start heaving against the Milwaukee Bucks. That night, the Cleveland broadcast had 2 legends on the call at the Bradley Center. 2 voices who, along with the stalwart Joe Tate, heralded LeBron's ascent in Cleveland. Strongsville, Ohio's Fred McLeod on play-by-play, and our old friend Austin Carr providing color. Those 2 bore witness to this. Look at this man refusing to accept a big halftime deficit, calling his own number at the buzzer. Look at him just foregoing normal basketball to pull up off a made shot.
He's as hot as a blowtorch.
Listen to veteran announcers, guys who've seen everything, absolutely piss themselves. And look at the bench, grown men just losing it. LeBron turned around a losing score by dropping 55 points, including 8 three-pointers from increasingly absurd distance. So yeah, when you give that even the tiniest bit of help, good things happen. The Cavs played elite offense and restored their signature defense. They won 66 games, still the franchise record by a long shot. Come postseason, the 09 Cavs melted what remained of the Pistons, then smoked the Hawks. Cleveland entered the Eastern Conference Finals on a path swept clean, 8 straight double-digit victories. In between, LeBron checked off another personal achievement, taking home the 2009 NBA MVP trophy. The league and its fan base braced for a blockbuster finals matchup. LeBron and the Cavs against 08 MVP Kobe Bryant and the reanimated LA Lakers. But first, a surprise conference final opponent. Instead of a Boston rematch, the Cavs would face these guys. The Orlando Magic, banged up as they were, had overthrown the similarly hampered Celtics in the second round. Orlando had drafted Dwight Howard #1 the year after Cleveland. Then they'd retained talent, made more good draft picks, and shelled out cash to ensure support for their new superstar. If you're counting All-Stars, the 2009 Magic had their own big three. Dwight's powerful dunks centered a half-court offense rife with shooters. His shot blocking was the linchpin of a top-shelf interior defense. The Magic played elegant, overwhelming basketball for Coach Stan Van Gundy. Cleveland, though, represented the clear favorite, at least until a Game 1 that resembled a sort of sped-up version of those old Pistons games. Instead of a defensive struggle, it was a shootout. Dwight commanded the middle, while point forward Hedo Turkoglu orchestrated a three-point bonanza. Cleveland kept pace because of LeBron. For all the advances they'd made, it was just LeBron. He scored a pristine 49 points. Most everyone else shot poorly. Howard's right-hand man, Rashard Lewis, punctuated a rally with this clutch three. West came up short on the return, and Mo Williams couldn't cash in this nice tip from LeBron. The Cavs' frictionless playoff streak hit an abrupt snag with a Game 1 loss at Quicken Loans Arena. And speaking of that streak, the Cavs' long layoff following their short second-round series manifested in a severe bout of leg cramps for LeBron. Clevelanders were nervous. Game 2 offered reassurance. LeBron once again had to carry the Cavs, and this time he secured the critical shot. With Turkoglu on his hip, James caught and fired on target before 1 second elapsed. Joe Tate's radio call conveys the relief of a long-awaited break for the Cavs.
Looks, fires to LeBron, three ball in the air. He hit it! He hit it! Cavaliers win!
Finally, for the first time in a playoff history defined by MJ, Cleveland hosted a dramatic, game-winning shot by the league's premier player, the guy, for the home team. But that only evened the series. Orlando's superior balance won out at home in an ugly Game 3 and a Game 4 that featured more clutch shooting from Rashard Lewis. LeBron finally got some help from West and Williams to avoid elimination in Game 5, but it all came crashing down in a grim Game 6 defeat. Kobe vs. LeBron was canceled. Perhaps frustrated with teammates who'd fallen well short of the Magic supporting cast, LeBron left those guys to answer for the upset series defeat. He departed Orlando in a huff, without shaking a hand or talking to anyone, including media, which, they didn't like. LeBron later insisted he was happy in Cleveland despite 2 straight campaigns short of the 07 finals run. Not happy enough to sign a contract extension, though. The clock kept ticking toward 2010, next summer. Ferry entered desperation mode. The kind of short-sighted, just make a trade mindset that, brought him to Cleveland when Cavs management freaked out about Ron Harper in 1989. This time, Cleveland dealt for Shaquille O'Neal, but not the Shaquille O'Neal you're imagining, not the one Ferry himself had played against. Shaq was 37 years old, a relic of his dominant self. Midway through the 2010 season, still needing help, Ferry put together a trade for Phoenix Suns All-Star Amari Stoudemire. Stoudemire would immediately become LeBron's best teammate yet by a wide margin. Oh, hi. Amari was also headed for free agency, so the Cleveland front office envisioned him and LeBron re-upping together to lead the Cavs in the new decade. But yet another big trade for an excellent potential co-star failed to materialize. Thus, the Cavs' big 2010 deadline edition, their last chance to pair LeBron with a real-deal co-star, was Antoine Jamison. This obviously wasn't enough. The Cavs cracked 60 wins again and took care of the Bulls in the first round, but the healthy Celtics awaited Cleveland in round 2. The secondary Cavs went cold once again, and this time, so did LeBron himself. Cleveland generated a momentary swell of hope by destroying the Celtics in Game 3 at Boston, but the Cavs barely put up a fight the rest of the series. Nursing a mysterious elbow injury that became an annoying meme, LeBron shot a horrid 18 of 53 in 3 consecutive losses. No teammate came close to picking up the slack. The last moments the NBA's best player, an Ohioan, spent under contract with Ohio's NBA team looked like this. Mike Breen knew what everyone was thinking.
Cleveland fans wondering if that's the last time he'll take off a Cavalier jersey.
And it was. In 2010, LeBron got to choose. For the first time in his career, King James entered unrestricted free agency, an opportunity available only to certain NBA players and only since the 1988 collective bargaining agreement. Thanks to his veteran superstar status, James could work wherever he wanted, free to move in a way the greats of yesteryear, those union members who laid the groundwork for this contractual right, never could. No franchise held the power to conscript LeBron's talents. League rules allowed his incumbent team, the Cavaliers, to make the best offer, but Cleveland could not demand compensation for his departure, nor could they prevent it by matching a salary offer. All the front office could do was try to appease him with moves. All fans could do was plead. Some of those Cavs fans fixated on their star filing to change his jersey number from 23 to 6. Surely he wouldn't bother with the paperwork if he planned to change teams, never mind who might have given him that idea. In any event, LeBron had thrown out all kinds of hints in recent years. He knew what he was doing. James headlined the biggest free agent summer since 1996, when MJ signed a big new deal with Chicago, when Shaquille O'Neal fled his draft city to begin building a dynasty in Los Angeles, and when the Cavs' biggest signing was Mark West. LeBron added a new layer to this 2010 edition of the seismic free agency bonanza. The King guaranteed himself a supporting cast. In a move that germinated back in 2006 when they all signed 4-year deals, LeBron and his old Team USA pals, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, freed up all at once and joined forces. While the new Big Three in Miami built gradually toward a championship, 2 it turned out, the Cavaliers sunk. Dan Gilbert began this chapter by throwing a public rich guy tantrum. Gilbert scolded LeBron in a spiteful open letter, somehow the second of its kind that decade, although at least Gordon Gunn's letter admonishing Carlos Boozer wasn't published in Comic Sans. We still don't know why Gilbert expressed his fury in the same typeface I used for my 3rd grade book report about armadillos, but it certainly diluted his message. Childish as this looked, Gilbert wasn't alone in resenting the NBA's best player for ditching the team in his hometown. You know, the team that got lucky enough to draft him, the team that from the Boozer fiasco to the summer of '05 to all those non-trades never provided LeBron, the guy, a single teammate anywhere near the kind MJ or Kobe had in their early careers. Meanwhile, with a new coach and a new GM, people who probably thought they were signing up to work beside LeBron, what remained of the Cavs re-entered the muck. Cleveland finished the 2011 season at 19-63, worst in the East. For the 3rd time in franchise history, and from the greatest heights they'd ever reached, the Cavaliers plummeted once more to their death. That was 5 years ago. That was before Ferry's GM replacement traded Mo Williams for a lucky 2011 lotto ticket. Before that ticket won Cleveland the opportunity to choose Kyrie Irving. That was before the Cavs remained bad enough to win another draft lottery in 2013 and then do it again the next season. Cleveland certainly did not nail all their draft picks, but Dan Gilbert's son Nick has been an outstanding good luck charm. After 4 years, 2 titles, and another 2 MVP awards in Miami, LeBron James reached unrestricted free agency again in 2014, days after the Cavs drafted Andrew Wiggins first overall. Maybe LeBron would leave Miami, but for Cleveland, a young, losing team, a team still owned by Comic Sans Boy with fans who'd trashed their star in 2010, then did this in 2013? It sounded weird, but if you'd been looking closely or if you'd been listening to LeBron, you saw a window. The 2014 Cavs had some things they lacked back when James made his heartbreaking decision 4 years prior. They had a superstar point guard in Kyrie. Their young talent base now included Wiggins, a prospect hyped almost as intensely as LeBron once was. And Cleveland had laid some groundwork. They made gestures. They invited LeBron to Zydrunas Ilgauskas' jersey retirement in March 2014, and the King accepted. Dan Gilbert had offered olive branches, public and private. He even deleted his infantile open letter. So when July arrived, Cavs management got to meet with LeBron's agent, Rich Paul. Paul brought along Mark Termini, the agent who'd once handled Ron Harper's turbulent negotiations with Cleveland. The Cavs felt good enough about the meeting to clear cap space in a hurry. Was this really happening? Cleveland is the second most populous city in Ohio. It gets quite cold, and it doesn't boast quite as rich a nightlife as some other NBA markets. For the finest, rudest point on the city's reputation among NBA players, we turn to Joakim Noah, who was tired of losing to the rival Cavs in 2010 and did a little trolling.
Every time I look out my window, it's pretty depressing out here, man. It's bad. It's bad. I mean, I never heard anybody say I'm going to Cleveland on vacation. I mean, what's so good about Cleveland?
For 44 years, billionaires and their executives drafted, traded, and overpaid to make people come to Cleveland and play for the Cavaliers. 2014, at last, was different. The best player in basketball, who held all the power, was a man born and raised in Ohio. He could choose. And for the first time ever, thanks to patience and planning and a lot of luck, the guy chose to be a Cleveland Cavalier. This time, LeBron announced his world-shaking decision in a Sports Illustrated article. LeBron was coming back, coming home. LeBron was still an Ohioan, but he wasn't a kid anymore, and he would not be passive. He continued to choose. The King arrived with big plans for his home community and with an agenda for his home team. James had leverage, too. His contract guaranteed only 1 season in Cleveland. If the Cavs wanted to avoid another 2010, they'd have to satisfy LeBron immediately. The Kevin Love trade was only kind of the Cavs' idea. Before LeBron surprised Cleveland by signing, new GM David Griffin had discussed but ultimately abandoned a trade with Minnesota for their fed-up star. But then LeBron arrived and immediately called Love himself to propose a partnership. Kevin was into it, so suddenly LeBron's boss had little choice but to figure out a deal. Throughout LeBron's machinations, Andrew Wiggins found himself in a very uncomfortable state of limbo. His name was conspicuously absent from LeBron's homecoming address, and the reason became clear. The Kevin Love deal sent Wiggins to Minnesota. punted from one lottery team to another weeks after draft night. The number one prospect had no say in any of this unprecedented movement. LeBron returned to Cleveland holding a list of role players he wanted around, and the Cavs obliged. Cleveland signed Mike Miller, formerly of the Heat. They signed James Jones, formerly of the Heat. And the King didn't just influence transactions. Cavaliers coach David Blatt, an overseas icon new to the NBA, felt undermined from day one. In the locker room, LeBron took it upon himself to mentor Kyrie, who did not necessarily want his mentorship. In practice, LeBron called meetings. In games, LeBron sometimes called for timeouts and sets and substitutions. The actual basketball of the 14-15 season took a toll on LeBron's health. He missed a spate of games right after his 30th birthday. But James used that absence to further flex his power. He helped broker the trade that brought in J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert. LeBron took an unusual mid-season trip to Miami, rehabbing injuries at a distance while rumors swirled and the Cavs lost games. They actually fell below the 500 mark before the end of January 2015. LeBron stirred up drama with coded tweets, chastised media members who concluded the tweets were directed at Kevin Love, then later admitted the media people were right. All this and the Cavs were, pretty good. At least once LeBron returned. They hit their stride in the spring and earned a playoff 2 seed. Their run through the Eastern Conference did hit adversity. Love got his shoulder yanked out by the Celtics, and without him, the Cavs had to work to beat the Bulls. Cleveland only overcame an early deficit because LeBron defied Coach Blatt's play call to hit a game winner. But in the conference finals, Cleveland dismantled the upstart Atlanta Hawks, a team built by, Danny Ferry, before he took the fall for reading some racist notes off a scouting report. Anyway, LeBron got the Cavs back in the NBA Finals in 2015. The Cavaliers that chose him made the finals once in 7 seasons. The Cavaliers he chose did it on the first try. But that was the end of the line. Love's shoulder kept him out, and Irving blew up his kneecap in Game 1 of the series. Cleveland's healthier, splashier opponent, the Golden State Warriors, reaped the fruits of a more gradual build. Their personnel comprised a variety of footnotes and what-ifs for Cleveland. League MVP Steph Curry hoisted his first championship trophy in his original home state against the team that once squandered his dad. Curry's supporting cast featured talented draft picks the Cavaliers passed on. Klay Thompson from the 2011 draft, Harrison Barnes and Draymond Green from 2012. That roster reached new heights under the leadership of Coach Steve Kerr, another former Cavalier player whose career peaked elsewhere. Last season, the Warriors planted their flag as the new boss, standing between LeBron and a title for his hometown. And it's the same guys on the floor right now, in their own arena, seconds from defeat. What changed in the past year? Well, the Warriors only got better. Like best regular season record in history better. Golden State blazed through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, then avoided a conference final upset from Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and the OKC Thunder thanks to a stunning Game 5 comeback and otherworldly scoring in Games 6 and 7. This team fills buckets like no one's ever seen. The Cavaliers also improved, despite, or maybe because of, LeBron's grip on the organization. James signed another short contract this past summer, but only after ensuring Cleveland would pay his free agent teammates. The Cavs sweated out a negotiation with Tristan Thompson, who's a Rich Paul client like LeBron is, and they even reeled in an old pal from LeBron's first stint, Mo Williams. During the season, King James cooked up the same flavors of drama. Another mid-season sojourn in Miami, and more inscrutable tweets. And LeBron probably influenced this year's shocking mid-season move, the firing of Coach Blatt. Cleveland held the East's best record in January, but that wasn't enough to save Blatt. LeBron preferred Blatt's deputy, Tyronn Lue. And it's Lue coaching the Cavaliers tonight for Game 7. Deposing the winningest coach in the East mid-season worked out. The Cavs heated up offensively, got a healthy Kyrie back up to speed, and swept the first 2 playoff rounds. The Cavs' only real scare came against the Toronto Raptors, a new contender, built in part with the consultation of former Cleveland GM Wayne Embry. Cleveland cleaned up a tight early series with blowouts in Games 5 and 6. They secured another trip to the finals with a full Big Three, trophy presented by the wonderful Austin Carr. But this Cavs squad once again hit a wall out west. The Warriors humiliated Cleveland with a torrid scoring run in the second half of Game 1, then beat them even worse in Game 2. LeBron and Kyrie got some measure of revenge in Game 3, but Love missed it with a concussion. And Game 4 was back to the usual. Golden State took a 3-1 lead thanks to Curry's first huge game of the series. Steph hit 7 of the Warriors' record-setting 17 three-pointers. Draymond Green added injury to insult by smacking a frustrated LeBron in the taint. Or insult to injury? I never know how to phrase that. Point is, LeBron had a sore perineum and the Cavs were screwed. It's cool that LeBron came home, but a week ago, it looked like he picked the wrong time or the wrong teammates to bring a championship ring to his birthplace. Up 3-1, the Warriors appeared inevitable. Every bit as domineering as the Spurs, who snuffed Cleveland's first deep run with LeBron in 2007. But these are not those Cavs. During his first Cleveland stint, LeBron watched a teammate crack 30 points in the playoffs exactly one time, Boobie Gibson's 0-7 closeout performance against Detroit. That was to be expected. Examine regular season averages from that era, and you'll see LeBron never had a big scorer by his side. Opponents exposed that in the playoffs. The most productive second option from that era, Mo Williams, never really went off when it counted. This is not to besmirch Williams, who, remember, is back on the Cavs bench this season. Mo scored tonight. I just want to highlight the difference between that era and this one. He, more than anyone, is the difference. Kyrie Irving. Irving is the most prolific bucketeer ever to accompany LeBron in Cleveland. Kyrie can take the wheel when called upon. And in Game 5, he proved as much. Freed up somewhat by a 1-game suspension for the defensive specialist who'd smacked his gooch, LeBron scored 41 points. And crucially, so did Kyrie. Irving reached his 41 on just 24 shots, including 5 three-pointers. The Cavs ran away in the second half to romp at Oracle Arena, led by the first teammates ever to break 40 points in the same NBA Finals game. Back at home for Game 6, the Cavs rode their momentum to a blowout score in the first quarter. This time, James didn't need much offensive help, stifling a Warrior comeback with 41 points and 11 dimes. True vintage LeBron. A 3-1 deficit turned into a 3-3 tie, which gave us tonight's winner-take-all showdown in Oakland. For the first time all series, this game has been incredibly close. Golden State gained some edge in the first half, but Kyrie recovered that ground in the third quarter. More than anything else, it's been a slog. You know the Warriors aren't themselves when the only guy hitting from outside is Draymond, who shrugs while he shoots. And it hasn't been much better for the Cavs. LeBron's been hit or miss, and Love is probably still concussed, although each did produce a stunning defensive stop to keep Golden State scoreless over 4 minutes preceding this moment. Andre Iguodala's layup with 2 minutes to go would have given the Warriors a lead, but LeBron may have literally left an impact crater with this chase down block.
Oh, blocked by James!
And we saw how Kev held his own against Earth's scariest three-point shooter. But Love and James have both been cold from the field in this final period. Even Kyrie was 1 of 5 in the fourth quarter before he hit, one of the biggest shots in NBA history. Seconds later, LeBron trailed Irving down the lane and came so close to converting one of the greatest dunks ever. Even with the miss, this Draymond Green foul put LeBron on the line, where he hit one of 2 free throws, adding the critical 4th point to Cleveland's lead. Now, the Warriors have little hope of coming back with just one remaining possession. Those plays comprise the pinnacle, the very razor's edge of a rocky 46-year climb. When this time elapses, LeBron will certainly be named 2016 NBA Finals MVP for the world champion Cleveland Cavaliers. LeBron James will be the guy to make it happen for a fan base that bears the scars of a half-century spent falling short. Clevelanders know from history how critical it is for an NBA franchise to value the all-important draft lottery, to make trades for the right reasons. Each of those keys unlocked the potential for a champion in Cleveland. But Cavs fans also know that finding great players is one thing, attracting them is another. LeBron James didn't choose to be born in Cleveland. LeBron James didn't choose to be drafted a Cavalier. But after a bitter departure, some glorious time away, and a few years of Cavalier luck, LeBron James, the guy, chose to come home. He remodeled home to match his tastes. Speaking of home, what's going on in Ohio right now, 2,000 miles away from Game 7? Well, Joe Tate is at home and he's watching on TV. He has mostly tuned out the Cavaliers since retiring, but he couldn't resist tonight. 2 old friends are watching tonight too, and they're at work. Fred McLeod, the Ohio-born play-by-play guy who's been the TV voice of the Cavs since 2006. Austin Carr, the first ever Cavalier #1 pick, whose number hangs from the rafters in Cleveland. The longtime partners are announcing this game on a private feed for the home arena watch party. As these final seconds tick off the clock in Oakland, let's listen to Fred and AC's voices back home. Let's experience this through the ears of a fan base that waited over 46 years to be right here. Let's embrace the end of a half-century's longing. At last, it's Cleveland's time. Welcome to a moment in history.
Curry, they'll give the 3. No, rebound. Maurice Spates. Good night, Oakland. It's over. The 52-year drought is over. It's over. The Cavaliers have won the NBA championship. Everybody stand up and cheer. 18,801 days, and it's over. Cleveland, celebrate. Go crazy because the championship is yours.